I never imagined that stepping off the private jet in Oak Ridge would bring back so many memories, each one as vivid as the moment I first discovered my passion for success. The familiar scent of pine trees mixed with the subtle sweetness of Mrs. Wilson's bakery down on Main Street hit me immediately. 20 years had passed since I'd last walked these streets, yet somehow it felt like yesterday. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," said Jim, the airport manager who'd apparently been there since I was a kid. His weathered face broke into a genuine smile, the kind you never see in Manhattan boardrooms. "Thanks, Jim. And please, it's still just Nathan." The town car waited on the tarmac, but I decided to walk instead. I needed to feel the ground beneath my feet, to remind myself that this place was real and not just some sentimental dream I'd conjured during late nights at the office. Oak Ridge hadn't changed much. The hardware store where my father had worked still stood proudly on the corner of Elm and 3rd, though the sign looked freshly painted. Dawson's Diner, where Mike and I would pool our allowances for chocolate milkshakes every Friday afternoon, had expanded to include outdoor seating. The high school football field where we'd spent countless evenings dreaming of escape now seemed much smaller than I remembered. I'd become an unrelenting billionaire CEO, hardened by boardroom battles and cutthroat deals, yet the warmth of my past still beckoned me home. The nostalgia was almost overwhelming, blending familiar sights with the bittersweet knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The old maple tree in Riverfront Park still stood tall, its branches now reaching even higher into the sky. I ran my fingers over the rough bark, finding the faded carving. N+M, Friends Forever, 1998. Mike and I had spent an entire afternoon working on that carving, convinced our friendship would withstand anything life threw at us. And it had, right up until the accident 3 months ago. "Nathan Carter? Is that really you?" A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Jenkins, my high school English teacher, approached with a cane but the same bright eyes I remembered. "I always knew you'd make something of yourself, but goodness, you've exceeded even my wildest expectations." We chatted briefly about her grandchildren and my company. I didn't tell her the real reason for my return. How could I explain that the most successful period of my life coincided with my greatest personal loss? That every headline celebrating my business achievements felt hollow without Mike there to call and tease me about becoming corporate. The small bed and breakfast on Cherry Lane welcomed me with open arms, literally, as Martha, the owner, insisted on a hug rather than a handshake. "We've got your usual room ready," she said, as if I'd been there last week instead of 2 decades ago. The one overlooking the creek. Martha didn't mention Mike either, though the slight tremor in her voice told me she was thinking about him too. Everyone in town must know by now. In places like Oak Ridge, news travels faster than light. I spent that first evening walking along Whispering Creek, where Mike and I had spent countless summer days skipping rocks and building elaborate dams. The setting sun painted the water gold, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice calling me to check out a particularly impressive stone or unusual bug he'd discovered. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying our last phone conversation. "You should come home, Nate. There's something important I need to discuss with you." His voice had been serious, lacking the usual jokes and casual banter. I'd promised to visit soon, after just one more deal. Now, soon would never come. The morning brought a knock on my door. Martha stood there with coffee and a sealed envelope. "Mike left this for you," she said softly. "He asked me to give it to you when you came back. He always believed you would." The envelope sat untouched on the nightstand as I prepared for the day ahead. I wasn't ready yet. Whatever Mike had wanted to tell me, whatever was written in that letter, would make this all too real. For now, I just needed to reconnect with the town, to walk the streets we'd walked together, to remember who I was before spreadsheets and stock options defined my existence. With every step through Oak Ridge, I felt both a resurgence of hope and the sting of impending loss. The realization that my childhood best friend was no longer there to share this bittersweet reunion with me set the tone for an emotional journey. I carried not only the weight of his memory, but also an unspoken promise to honor his legacy, unaware that fate had already begun to weave its intricate plan around me. As I approached the old baseball field where our Little League team had once played, I noticed the scoreboard had been replaced with a newer model. A small plaque caught my eye, in loving memory of Michael Thompson, who taught us all how to play with heart. My throat tightened. Unlike me, Mike had returned to Oak Ridge after college, becoming a beloved elementary school teacher and coach. He'd chosen to invest in people rather than profits, a choice I was only now beginning to understand the value of. The clouds darkened overhead as I continued my walk, mirroring my mood. Rain began to fall gently as I ducked into Mercer's bookstore, another childhood haunt that had somehow survived the digital age. The familiar smell of paper and binding glue wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. "Take your time," said Grace Mercer, now in her 70s, but still manning the register with sharp eyes. "Sometimes the right book finds you when you need it most." I nodded, grateful for the space to breathe, to think, to feel. Tomorrow I would open Mike's letter. Tomorrow I would face whatever he had needed to tell me. But today, I would simply remember what it felt like to be Nathan Carter, before I became the man whose face appeared on the cover of Fortune magazine, the man who had everything and nothing all at once. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind that distinctive earthy scent that always reminded me of new beginnings. I finally worked up the courage to open Mike's letter over breakfast, but found only a cryptic note: "Meet me at our spot. I've left something important there for you." Our spot could only mean one place, the old oak tree at Westview Park, where we'd built our makeshift fort as kids. I made my way there after finishing my coffee, trying to imagine what Mike could have left behind. Perhaps a memento from our childhood? A final message? The oak still stood majestically at the far end of the park, its massive branches creating a natural canopy that had sheltered countless secrets over the years. As I approached, I noticed movement beneath the tree. A small figure darted between the lower branches, followed by what appeared to be a tan blur. Curious, I moved closer. I encountered him on this chilly afternoon at Westview Park, a young boy, no older than 10, with a mop of unruly dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken stories. The boy's presence, combined with the enthusiastic energy of a small, scruffy terrier puppy by his side, created a scene that both baffled and intrigued me. "Hey there," I called out, keeping my distance to avoid frightening him. The boy froze, clutching the puppy to his chest protectively. "Are you Mr. Carter?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I am," I replied, surprised. "Nathan Carter. How did you know that?" "Mr. Thompson told me about you. He said you'd come back someday." The boy's eyes, I noticed, were a startling blue, almost the same shade as Mike's. "You knew Mike?" I asked, moving closer. The boy nodded. "He was my teacher. And my friend." A shadow passed over his young face. "He helped me after my parents died. He said you two used to take care of stray animals when you were kids." In that moment, I was transported back to a time when Mike and I would care for every stray animal we found, sharing our joys and sorrows with them as if they were part of our family. We'd rehabilitated injured birds, fed neighborhood cats, and once even raised a baby squirrel that had fallen from its nest. "What's your name?" I asked, kneeling down to eye level with the boy. "Jamie. Jamie Foster." He relaxed his grip on the puppy, who immediately squirmed free and bounded over to investigate my shoes. "And this is Scout. Mr. Thompson helped me find him at the shelter last month." "It's nice to meet you both, Jamie." I reached out to pet the enthusiastic puppy. "What are you doing out here alone?" Jamie's expression turned serious. "Not alone. With Scout." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. "Mr. Thompson left this for you. He said when you came back, I should give it to you." I accepted the key, turning it over in my palm. It looked like it belonged to a storage locker or small lockbox. "Did he tell you what it opens?" Jamie shook his head. "But he said you're smart and would figure it out." A small smile flickered across his face. "He also said you're really rich and important now, but that you were still the same Nate who helped him build the treehouse that fell apart after one rainstorm." I couldn't help but laugh. Leave it to Mike to make sure I stayed humble, even from beyond the grave. The boy's initial shyness soon gave way to an unyielding curiosity as we sat beneath the oak tree. Scout settled between us, occasionally chasing a leaf or butterfly before returning to Jamie's side. Mr. Thompson told me you lived in a building taller than clouds, Jamie said, eyes wide with wonder. Not quite that tall, I smiled. But it is a pretty big building. Do you own the whole thing? Just the top few floors. Wow! Jamie picked at the grass. Must be lonely up there. The simple observation hit harder than any boardroom criticism ever had. Sometimes, I admitted. How about you? Where do you live, Jamie? At Oak Ridge Children's Home now. His voice grew quieter. It's okay. Miss Daniels is nice, and they let me keep Scout even though pets aren't usually allowed. Mr. Thompson arranged it before. He trailed off. I listened intently as he recounted tales of his everyday struggles, navigating life at the children's home, missing his parents, trying to keep up with schoolwork despite everything. His words painted a picture of a life marred by loss yet illuminated by resilience. There was something hauntingly familiar about his spirit, a reflection of the friend I had once known so well. Mr. Thompson used to visit me every Saturday, Jamie continued. We'd come here and work on training Scout, or sometimes just read books. He said reading takes you places, even when you can't go anywhere. He was right about that, I said softly. Mike was always right about the important stuff. As afternoon stretched into early evening, Jamie and I exchanged stories. I told him about the ridiculous adventures Mike and I had embarked on as kids, like the time we tried to build a raft to sail down Whispering Creek, only to sink 10 feet from shore. Jamie shared his dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday, inspired by his love for Scout and all animals. It's getting late, I finally said, noticing the lengthening shadows. Can I walk you back to the children's home? Jamie nodded, whistling for Scout who had wandered off to investigate a squirrel. The three of us made our way through Westview Park and down Maple Avenue toward the children's home, a Victorian-style building I remembered from my youth. It had always seemed imposing and somewhat sad, even when passing by on my bike as a child. Ms. Daniels, the director, greeted us at the door. Her expression registered surprise at seeing me, though she quickly masked it with professional courtesy. Mr. Carter, what an unexpected honor. I see you've met Jamie. Yes, we had quite the conversation at the park, I replied, watching as Jamie knelt to remove Scout's leash. Jamie, dinner's nearly ready. Why don't you get washed up? Ms. Daniels suggested. After Jamie disappeared inside with Scout trotting at his heels, Ms. Daniels turned to me with a more serious expression. Michael Thompson spoke of you often. He believed you would return someday. Did he tell you why he wanted me to meet Jamie? I asked. She shook her head. Michael kept his own counsel, but he did leave something for you here as well. She reached into her desk drawer and handed me an envelope similar to the one Martha had given me. He asked that I give this to you after you'd met Jamie. I accepted the second envelope, thanked her, and promised to visit again soon, a promise I intended to keep. As I walked back to the bed and breakfast, I realized that in that encounter, fate was offering me a chance to reconnect not only with my hometown, but with the raw, unfiltered emotions of my past. The boy and his loyal puppy had become living symbols of a world I had long forgotten, a world filled with heartache, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. Their presence was a silent call to unravel the layers of my own guarded heart and to step into a narrative that was waiting to be rewritten. Back at Martha's bed and breakfast, I sat on the porch swing with both unopened envelopes in my hands. The evening air carried the distant sound of a high school baseball game and the scent of someone grilling nearby. Normal life continuing in Oak Ridge, even as my own felt suspended between past and present. I opened the second envelope first. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Oak Ridge, along with a note in Mike's familiar scrawl. Some things are better explained in person. Or as close as I can manage now. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Sleep eluded me that night. My mind kept returning to Jamie, to the way his eyes lit up when he talked about Scout, to how he'd lost so much yet still maintained that essential childhood resilience. And something else nagged at me, a vague sense of recognition I couldn't quite place. The days following our unexpected meeting were filled with revelations. First came the visit to the bank, where Mike's safety deposit box contained legal documents, photos, and a video recording. I watched it alone in my room that evening, tears streaming down my face as Mike's image appeared on my laptop screen. "Hey Nate," he began, looking healthy despite the date stamp from just weeks before his sudden heart attack. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you've met Jamie. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll just say it. Jamie is my son." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mike had never mentioned having a child, not in any of our calls or texts over the years. "His mother was Rebecca Foster," Mike continued, answering my unspoken question. "Remember her from senior year? We reconnected about 11 years ago. It was brief. She moved away, and I didn't know about Jamie until 4 years ago when she and her husband died in that car accident on Highway 16. She'd named me as Jamie's guardian in her will, in case anything happened to both of them." I paused the video, struggling to process this information. Rebecca Foster, of course I remembered her. She'd been Mike's lab partner in chemistry, a quiet girl with a brilliant mind who'd gone on to study medicine. And now her son, Mike's son, was an orphan twice over. The video continued with Mike explaining that he hadn't told me because he knew how busy I was, how important my company had become. "You were making headlines, Nate. I was just a small-town teacher raising a son I'd only just met myself. But Jamie knows all about you, the legendary Nathan Carter, my best friend who conquers the business world while I conquer 5th grade spelling tests." Mike's face grew more serious. "I've been having health problems, Nate. Nothing I told anyone about, but the doctors say my heart could give out any time. So I made arrangements for Jamie, just in case. Ms. Daniels at the children's home agreed to take him temporarily if anything happened to me, until you came back." His familiar smile returned. "And I knew you would come back, eventually. You never could stay away from Oak Ridge forever." The rest of the video detailed Mike's wishes, that I would consider becoming Jamie's guardian, giving him the stability he desperately needed. "I'm not asking because you're wealthy, Nate. I'm asking because beneath that CEO exterior, you're still the same guy who stayed up all night with me when we found that injured hawk, the guy who taught me what true friendship means. Jamie needs that guy. Think about it, okay? That's all I ask." The video ended, leaving me in silence with the weight of Mike's request. I spent hours afterward looking through the photos he'd included, pictures of Jamie as a baby that Rebecca had sent him, more recent ones of Jamie and Mike fishing at Whispering Creek, playing with Scout when the puppy was even smaller. I went to bed with my mind racing, but when morning came, I knew what I needed to do. I called my assistant in New York, instructing her to clear my schedule indefinitely. "Family emergency," I told her, the words feeling strange yet right on my tongue. The next few days were filled with long walks with Jamie and Scout, deep conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. I found myself drawn into the boys' world, a realm of struggle and survival where every smile was earned through sheer determination and every tear carried the burden of a lost childhood. As I listened to his stories about school, about the other kids at the children's home, about his memories of his mother and stepfather, I couldn't help but see echoes of my own past and the dreams I once held dear. "Did you and Mr. Thompson really build a rocket when you were kids?" Jamie asked during one of our walks through Riverfront Park. I laughed. "We tried. It was more of a glorified firework attached to a garbage can lid. Almost burned down Old Man Whitaker's tool shed." "Were you in big trouble?" "Enormous trouble. Had to paint his fence for the entire summer." I smiled at the memory. "But you know what? Mike brought his radio, and we made up ridiculous songs while we worked. Somehow, he always turned consequences into adventures. During our third trip to the ice cream parlor on Main Street, Jamie always ordered chocolate chip, just like Mike used to. The boy asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Are you going to leave soon? Go back to your tall building?" I looked into those familiar blue eyes, so much like my best friends, and felt something shift inside me. "Actually, I was thinking about staying in Oak Ridge for a while. Would that be okay with you?" The hope that flashed across his face was answer enough. Each evening, I returned to Martha's bed and breakfast and sat on the porch, watching the sunset over Oak Ridge. Night after night, I revisited memories of Mike, feeling his presence in the whispered winds and the starlit skies that blanketed the town. The green Victorian on Sycamore Street that his family had lived in, now occupied by strangers, became a poignant reminder of promises unfulfilled. One night, Martha joined me on the porch, offering a cup of coffee and her quiet wisdom. "Mike was so proud of you," she said after a comfortable silence. "Kept every article about you, showed everyone who'd listen." "That's my best friend," he'd say. "I should have visited more," I admitted, the regret sharp and cold despite the warm evening. Martha shook her head. "No sense in that kind of thinking." Mike understood. "He always said you were doing exactly what you were meant to do." And what about him? Was this what he was meant to do? Leave too soon, leave his son behind? "None of us gets to decide when our story ends, Nathan," Martha replied gently. "Only how fully we live the pages we're given." Mike lived his fully, teaching those kids, raising Jamie, being part of this community. I nodded, considering her words. Jamie mentioned that Mike helped him adopt Scout from the shelter. Martha smiled. Those two were inseparable from day one. Mike brought the puppy home as a surprise after Jamie had a particularly rough week. At school, some bullies were giving him trouble about being an orphan. Her expression darkened momentarily. Scout changed everything. Gave Jamie something to care for, something that needed him as much as he needed it. Every interaction with Jamie and his energetic puppy gradually chipped away at the hardened persona I had built over the years. I began to understand that my life, once dominated by relentless ambition, was incomplete without embracing the vulnerabilities and raw emotions that defined my early years. After a week in Oak Ridge, I made a decision. I called a real estate agent and arranged to see several houses for sale in town. The one I settled on was a craftsman-style home on Maple Avenue, just blocks from the elementary school where Mike had taught and where Jamie would return in the fall. It needed work. The hardwood floors were scratched, the kitchen dated, but it had good bones and a large fenced backyard perfect for an energetic boy and his equally energetic puppy. The memories, though painful, started to illuminate a path towards reconciliation with my past, a path that promised both redemption and renewal. As I signed the paperwork to purchase the house, I felt certain that somewhere, Mike was smiling his approval. Moving into the Craftsman house on Maple Avenue took less time than I expected. My possessions in New York, the expensive artwork, designer furniture, and various status symbols suddenly seemed unnecessary. I had Martha help me furnish the place with comfortable, practical pieces from local shops. The spare bedroom became Jamie's room, painted blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, like the ones Mike and I had in our childhood bedrooms. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Carter?" Ms. Daniels asked when I met with her to discuss becoming Jamie's guardian. Her concern was warranted. A billionaire CEO with no parenting experience suddenly wanting to care for an emotionally vulnerable child raised reasonable questions. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied. My legal team had already begun the paperwork, working remotely to expedite the process. While waiting for the guardianship to be approved, I visited Jamie daily at the children's home. We established a routine: walks with Scout in the morning, lunch at Dawson's Diner, and afternoons spent fixing up the house or exploring Oak Ridge's hidden corners that I'd half forgotten. "Will I still go to Lincoln Elementary in the fall?" Jamie asked one day as we painted his bedroom. "If that's what you want," I said. "It's only a few blocks from the house. Mr. Thompson's classroom is on the second floor," he said quietly. "Room 203. Sometimes I go sit outside it after school." I nodded, understanding the complicated grief that connected us. "Maybe we could ask Ms. Roberts if we could put a small plaque on the door. Something to remember him by. Like the one at the baseball field?" Jamie brightened. "Exactly like that." One rainy afternoon, as we were sorting through boxes of Mike's belongings that Ms. Daniels had stored for Jamie, the boy pulled out a worn shoebox. "These are my dad's special things," he explained, lifting the lid carefully. Inside were ticket stubs, photographs, and small mementos from throughout Mike's life. Many included me, our high school graduation tassels, a pebble from Whispering Creek that Mike had insisted looked exactly like Abraham Lincoln if you held it at the right angle, a baseball signed by both of us after our Little League championship win. "He showed me all of these," Jamie said. "He told me stories about each one. The boy hesitated, then added, "He said someday you might tell me your side of the stories too." That night, after driving Jamie back to the children's home with the promise to pick him up for breakfast the next morning, I returned to the quiet house. The rain had intensified, drumming steadily against the roof in a soothing rhythm. I made myself a cup of coffee and headed to the attic, where I'd stored several boxes of my own childhood memorabilia retrieved from my parents' old home before they sold it and moved to Florida. While sifting through a collection of old letters and memorabilia, I uncovered a sealed envelope addressed to me in Mike's familiar handwriting. This one was different from the others, older, the paper yellowed with age. With trembling hands, I opened it to reveal a letter dated nearly 15 years ago, shortly after I'd moved to New York to start my company. "Dear Nate," it began. "If you're reading this, something's happened to me, and you've finally come home to Oak Ridge. I'm writing this after our phone call tonight. You sounded different, excited about your new venture, but also harder somehow. I worry about you in that city, surrounded by people who only see your potential value, not your actual worth." I paused, remembering that call. I'd just secured my first major investor, had been working 20-hour days, surviving on caffeine and ambition. "I had a dream last night," Mike's letter continued. "In it, we were old men sitting on the dock at Whispering Creek, and you were saying how you wished you'd spent less time chasing success and more time just living. It scared me, Nate. Not because I don't want you to succeed, you know I'm your biggest fan, but because I'm afraid you might forget what we learned growing up here, that the measure of a life well lived isn't in achievements or bank accounts, but in the hearts we touch along the way." My coffee grew cold as I read on, Mike's words bridging the years between us. "I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll have a family someday. Maybe you'll build that empire you're always talking about. But I do know this, if anything ever happens to me, if I ever leave behind people who need care and guidance, there's no one in this world I'd trust more than you to step in. Not because you're brilliant with business strategies, but because underneath all that ambition beats the heart of a boy who once stayed up 3 nights straight to nurse a wounded fox back to health." The letter, a timeless reminder of a friendship that transcended life and death, concluded with a simple request: "Remember who you really are, Nate. And when the time comes to choose between what looks like success and what feels like meaning, choose meaning. It's what I'd want for you. It's what I'd want for anyone I care about." Reading his words, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, grief for the loss, yet an overwhelming sense of duty to honor his memory. His request was more than just a final wish. It was an invitation to revisit the values we cherished as children: kindness, compassion, and the unyielding belief in second chances. The next morning dawned clear after the night's rain. I arrived at the children's home early, Scout's leash in hand and a plan forming in my mind. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Miss Daniels greeted me at the door. "Jamie's just finishing breakfast. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you first." I followed her into her office, where I laid out my proposal, a substantial donation to the Oak Ridge Children's Home, enough to renovate the aging building, expand their programs, and establish a scholarship fund in Mike Thompson's name. Ms. Daniels stared at the figure I'd written down. "This is extremely generous." "It's the least I can do," I said. Mike loved this community. He'd want to make sure all its children were cared for, not just Jamie. When Jamie appeared in the doorway with Scout bounding alongside him, his face lit up at the sight of me. "Are we still going fishing today?" he asked eagerly. "Absolutely," I replied. "And I have something important to talk to you about." We spent the morning at Whispering Creek, our fishing lines cast into the clear water, talking about what life might look like if Jamie came to live with me permanently. His questions were practical and straightforward. Would Scout have a yard to run in? Could he still visit his friends from the children's home? Would I know how to help with his math homework? "I'm not perfect, Jamie," I admitted. "I've never been a dad before. I'll make mistakes. But I promise to always try my best, to listen when you need to talk, and to make sure you never forget how much your dad loved you." The boy was quiet for a long moment, watching as his bobber drifted with the current. "Mr. Thompson, my dad, said you were the smartest person he ever knew," he finally said. "He said you could figure out anything if you tried hard enough." He gave me too much credit, I smiled. But in this case, I hope he was right. This unexpected command from beyond the grave became the turning point of my journey. I resolved to set aside my relentless business pursuits and immerse myself in the challenge of nurturing Jamie and caring for Scout. I would build a life here in Oak Ridge, not the life I'd once been so eager to escape, but something new, something that honored Mike's memory while creating space for Jamie to heal and grow. That evening, I called Lewis, my COO in New York. "I need you to step up," I told him. "I'll still be involved in major decisions, but day-to-day operations are yours now." "For how long?" Lewis asked, his voice betraying surprise despite his usual composure. I looked out the window at Jamie, who was in the backyard teaching Scout a new trick. "Indefinitely. I found something more important than quarterly reports." The legal guardianship was approved faster than expected, thanks to Mike's clear wishes and my legal team's efficiency. 2 weeks after I'd purchased the house on Maple Avenue, Jamie and Scout moved in permanently. The boy's possessions fit into 2 small suitcases, but his presence filled the house in ways I couldn't have imagined. As we unpacked his clothes into the dresser I'd bought for his room, Jamie pulled something from the bottom of his suitcase, a framed photograph of himself with Mike, both smiling broadly, Scout a tiny puppy between them. "This should go here," he said firmly, placing it on the nightstand. "So we can both see him every day." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The letter, Mike's final request, had shown me a path forward that I never would have found on my own. A path that led not to more success or power, but to a second chance at creating something meaningful, a family. Our first month together passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Jamie and I established household rules together, writing them on a chalkboard in the kitchen, a democratic approach that Mike would have approved of. Scout claimed the sunny spot beneath the living room window as his domain, his coat gleaming with health from regular walks and proper nutrition. Mornings began with breakfast together before Jamie caught the school bus. I'd rearranged my work schedule to handle video calls and emails while he was at school, keeping afternoons and evenings free for homework help, baseball practice, or simply throwing a frisbee for Scout in the backyard. "You're different here," remarked Elaine Chin, my company CFO, during one of our weekly video conferences. She'd known me since the early startup days and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. "Different how?" I asked, adjusting my laptop camera so she couldn't see the refrigerator behind me, covered with Jamie's artwork and school papers. "Calmer. Less intense." She studied me through the screen. "It suits you, Nathan. You look healthier." She wasn't wrong. The perpetual tension I'd carried in my shoulders had eased. The insomnia that had plagued me for years had improved. Even my diet had changed, no more rush meals at my desk or late-night takeout. Jamie needed regular, nutritious meals, so I learned to cook simple, wholesome food for both of us. "You're not burning eggs anymore," Jamie observed one Saturday morning as I slid a perfectly cooked omelet onto his plate. "Practice makes perfect," I replied, remembering the smoke-filled kitchen disaster from our first week together. Some changes were harder than others. I still reflexively reached for my phone during quiet moments. I still woke occasionally at 3 a.m., mind racing with business concerns. Old habits die hard, especially when they've been reinforced by years of success. But the rewards of my new life were immediate and tangible. Jamie's nightmares, which had been frequent when he first moved in, gradually decreased. His teachers reported improved concentration and participation in class. And I discovered the simple joy of being present, really present, in the small moments that made up our days together. As I dedicated myself to fulfilling Mike's request, my days transformed into a blend of structured routines and spontaneous moments of joy. I took on the role of a mentor, caregiver, and guardian, a far cry from the CEO persona that had defined my public life. Through shared meals, heartfelt conversations, and the simple act of playing fetch with Scout in the lengthening spring evenings, I began to forge a new legacy built on love and compassion. One Tuesday afternoon, I picked Jamie up from school to find him uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything okay, buddy?" I asked as we walked home, Scout's leash in Jamie's hand. Tommy Miller said you're only taking care of me because you feel sorry for me, he finally mumbled, eyes fixed on the sidewalk. He said you'll get bored and send me back to the children's home. I stopped walking, kneeling to Jamie's eye level. Look at me, I said gently. He reluctantly met my gaze. I'm here because I want to be. You're not a charity case or an obligation. You're family. I hesitated, then added, your dad was the brother I never had. That makes you and me family too. But you had this big important life before, Jamie persisted. With buildings and meetings and stuff. Don't you miss it? The question deserved an honest answer. Parts of it, sometimes, I admitted. But I don't miss the person I was becoming, someone too busy to remember what really matters. What really matters? Jamie asked. This, I said simply. Being here. Watching you grow up. Honoring the promise I made to your dad. I ruffled his hair. Besides, Tommy Miller clearly doesn't understand how remote work functions in the digital age. I'm still running my company, just differently now. Jamie considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Can we get ice cream? Homework first, then ice cream, I countered. Deal. Every day presented its own challenges, yet each obstacle became a lesson in humility and resilience. There was the night Jamie came down with a stomach virus, and I experienced the particular terror of a first-time parent facing illness. The parent-teacher conference where I realized Jamie was struggling with reading comprehension, necessitating twice-weekly sessions with a tutor. The afternoon scout escaped through an open gate and led us on a frantic search throughout the neighborhood. I encountered moments of intense vulnerability, where Jamie's unfiltered honesty reminded me that true strength lies not in wealth or power, but in the courage to love and to be loved. The puppy, with its boundless energy and unconditional affection, served as a constant reminder that life's simplest pleasures often carried the most profound meaning. One rainy Saturday, as Jamie and I worked on building a model rocket, a safer version than the one Mike and I had attempted, he suddenly asked, "Do you think my dad would be happy with how we're doing?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "I think he'd be very happy. He loved you more than anything, Jamie. All he wanted was for you to be safe and loved. And for you to remember who you really are," Jamie added, repeating the phrase from Mike's letter that I'd shared with him. "That too," I smiled. "He was always wiser than me, your dad." Jamie concentrated on gluing a small fin to the rocket body. "Sometimes I forget what his voice sounded like," he confessed quietly. "Is that bad?" "No, buddy. It's normal." I reached for my phone. "I have some videos. Would you like to see them?" We spent the afternoon watching clips of Mike, teaching his class, coaching Little League, mugging for the camera at various Oak Ridge festivals and events. In each one, his warmth and humor shone through. Jamie watched with rapt attention, occasionally laughing or pointing out details I'd missed. "We should make videos too," he decided afterward, "so we don't forget things." From then on, documenting our life together became a shared project. Jamie proved to be a natural filmmaker, capturing everyday moments with an eye for detail that impressed me, scout chasing butterflies in the garden, our disastrous attempt at baking a birthday cake for Ms. Daniels, the gradual transformation of the house into a home. Slowly, the community around us began to take notice. Neighbors who had once seen me as an untouchable magnate now recognized the genuine warmth in my eyes and the sincerity in my actions. Invitations to barbecues and community events replaced the awkward stares and whispered comments that had greeted my initial return. Mrs. Wilson from the bakery no longer felt the need to address me as Mr. Carter, instead calling cheerfully, "Morning, Nathan." Jamie's cinnamon rolls are ready, as we passed on our weekend walks. Coach Brennan at the community center asked if I'd help coordinate the summer baseball league, a role Mike had filled for years. Even Mayor Thompson, no relation to Mike, stopped me outside the hardware store to discuss my ideas for revitalizing Oak Ridge's struggling downtown area. It wasn't long before old wounds started to mend, and the town itself felt a subtle shift, a renewed belief that even the most hardened hearts could be transformed through compassion and commitment to a higher purpose. "You're becoming quite the local celebrity," remarked Dr. Sarah Lynn, Jamie's pediatrician, during his annual checkup. In a good way, she added with a smile. The school board was impressed by your proposal for the new STEM program. Mike always said Oak Ridge schools deserved the same resources as fancy private academies, I explained. I'm just putting money where his mouth was. The truth was more complex. Yes, I was honoring Mike's memory, but I'd also grown to love this town again, not with the nostalgic glow of childhood memories, but with a mature appreciation for its close-knit community and simpler rhythms. I found myself genuinely invested in its future, in making it a place where Jamie and kids like him could thrive. 6 months after becoming Jamie's guardian, I stood in the backyard watching him and Scout play an elaborate game of their own devising. The summer evening was perfect, fireflies beginning to blink in the gathering dusk, the scent of freshly cut grass hanging in the air. Jamie's laughter, free and uninhibited, carried across the yard as Scout performed an impressive leap to catch a tennis ball. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Lewis, probably with questions about the quarterly board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. For the first time since I could remember, I let the call go to voicemail without a twinge of anxiety. The report was prepared, the strategy sound. My team in New York was capable and trustworthy. Did you see that catch? Jamie called, waving to make sure I was watching. Incredible, I confirmed. Olympic level. As I watched them race across the yard, I realized that something fundamental had shifted within me. The driving ambition that had defined my adult life hadn't disappeared, but it had been redirected, channeled into building something more meaningful than corporate empires or financial kingdoms. I was building a family. Imperfect, unconventional, still finding our way, but a family nonetheless. And in doing so, I was honoring not just Mike's request, but also rediscovering parts of myself I'd nearly forgotten existed. Fall arrived in Oak Ridge with a spectacular display of color. The maple trees lining our street transformed into vibrant canopies of red and gold, and mornings carried a crisp chill that required Jamie to wear the jacket he perpetually forgot until reminded. Our routine had solidified into comfortable predictability. Weekday mornings were a synchronized dance of breakfast, packed lunches, and last-minute homework checks. Afternoons meant homework at the kitchen table, Scout resting patiently at Jamie's feet. Evenings were for dinner together, followed by reading, games, or walking through the neighborhood as Jamie cataloged the Halloween decorations appearing on various porches. "Can we do our house this weekend?" he asked one evening as we admired the elaborate graveyard the Hendersons had constructed on their front lawn. "Absolutely," I agreed. "Maybe we could make some of the decorations ourselves." Jamie's face lit up at the suggestion. "Like the papier-mâché pumpkins, Mr. Thompson," he stopped, then continued more softly, "like the ones my dad used to make with his class." I squeezed his shoulder gently. "Exactly like those. I bet Mrs. Davis still has the instructions in the art room at school. We could ask her tomorrow." These moments still happened regularly, sudden reminders of Mike's absence that temporarily dimmed Jamie's natural exuberance. But they were becoming less frequent and less overwhelming for both of us. Grief, I was learning, doesn't disappear. It transforms, becoming part of the landscape rather than dominating it. In the quiet moments before dawn, as I watched Jamie and Scout play under the soft glow of a rising sun on Saturday mornings, I realized that life had gifted me a second chance. A chance to rewrite my destiny and honor the memory of a friend who had once believed in the beauty of a humble heart. I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the opportunity to bridge the gap between past and present, weaving a narrative that was as much about healing as it was about hope. The anniversary of Mike's death approached with the falling leaves. I worried about how Jamie would handle it, consulting with both his therapist and Ms. Daniels for guidance. Children process grief differently than adults, Dr. Winters advised. Jamie might want to mark the day, or he might prefer to treat it as normal. Follow his lead, but be prepared for either possibility. As it turned out, Jamie had been thinking about the upcoming date too. One evening after dinner, as we washed dishes together, his job to rinse, mine to load the dishwasher, he broached the subject. "Next Thursday is the day my dad died," he said, matter-of-factly passing me a clean plate. "It is," I confirmed, giving him space to continue. "I don't want to be sad all day." His brow furrowed in concentration. But I don't want to just forget about it either. What would you like to do instead? I asked. Jamie considered this, chewing his lower lip thoughtfully. Could we do something my dad would have liked? Something fun to remember him? That Thursday, Jamie stayed home from school, and I cleared my schedule entirely. We drove to Whispering Creek at dawn, fishing poles and a picnic basket in the trunk. Scout rode in the back seat, his head hanging out the window, ears flapping in the wind. The creek was peaceful in the early morning light, mist rising from its surface as we set up our fishing spot, the same place where Mike and I had spent countless summer days as boys, and where he had later brought Jamie. My dad said the fish bite best at sunrise. Jamie informed me solemnly as he baited his hook with practiced ease. He was right about that, I agreed. He was right about a lot of things. We fished until mid-morning, catching enough smallmouth bass for dinner, then releasing them back into the creek's clear waters. Afterward, we hiked to the bluff overlooking the valley, where Mike had once helped organize community stargazing nights. This is where I first saw Saturn's rings, Jamie told me as we spread our picnic blanket. Dad brought his telescope, and everyone took turns looking. He said space makes our problems seem smaller. That sounds like something he would say, I smiled, unpacking the lunch we'd prepared together that morning, peanut butter and banana sandwiches, Mike's favorite, homemade chocolate chip cookies, and thermoses of hot chocolate. As we ate, Jamie shared stories about his father. Some I'd heard before, others new to me. I contributed my own memories, the happy ones and the mischievous ones that made Jamie laugh until he hiccuped. My dad was the best person ever, Jamie declared, flopping back on the blanket to stare at the clouds drifting overhead. He really was, I agreed, lying down beside him. And you know what? He'd be incredibly proud of the person you're becoming. Jamie turned his head to look at me, his expression suddenly serious. Do you think he'd be okay with me calling you Dad too? Not instead of him, he added hastily. Just, as well as. The question caught me off guard, a lump forming instantly in my throat. I'd be honored, I managed finally. But only if you're sure that's what you want. Jamie nodded decisively. I've been thinking about it for a while. I have 2 dads now, one in heaven and one here. That evening, we invited a small group to our home for a Remembering Mike dinner. Ms. Daniels, Martha from the bed and breakfast, Coach Brennan, and a few of Mike's closest teacher colleagues. We shared a meal and more stories, looking through old photographs and celebrating the life of a man who had touched all of us deeply. After our guests departed and Jamie was asleep, Scout curled at the foot of his bed. I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. The stars shone brightly in the clear October sky, and I found myself talking softly to Mike, updating him on Jamie's progress, on Scout's latest antics, on the changes in Oak Ridge. I think we're doing okay, I concluded. Not perfect, but okay. I promise I won't let you down. A gentle breeze rustled the remaining leaves on the maple tree, and I chose to take it as a sign of approval. The experiences that followed were as transformative as they were unexpected. With the anniversary observed, something shifted for both Jamie and me. We moved forward with a new sense of purpose, still honoring Mike's memory, but no longer defined primarily by his absence. Jamie's academic confidence grew, particularly in science and mathematics. Just like you, his teacher commented during our parent-teacher conference, causing a surge of unexpected pride. Scout graduated from basic obedience classes to agility training, revealing a talent that delighted Jamie and impressed the instructor. For my part, I found a new balance between my business responsibilities and family life. The company continued to thrive under the hybrid leadership model I'd established, with Lewis handling day-to-day operations in New York while I managed strategic direction remotely. The arrangement afforded me the flexibility to volunteer at Jamie's school, coach his baseball team, and be home every evening for dinner. I began to see the interconnectedness of our lives, the legacy of my childhood, the enduring bond with my late friend, and the bright future that lay ahead for Jamie and the community we were slowly rebuilding. Every shared smile and every tear shed in solidarity became a testament to the enduring power of love, friendship, and the relentless pursuit of redemption. Winter arrived with the first snow just before Thanksgiving. Jamie woke me at dawn, bouncing with excitement. "It's snowing! Can we go sledding? Can Scout come too?" We spent the morning at Henderson Hill, joining other families in the season's first sledding expedition. Jamie's cheeks flushed with cold and exhilaration as he raced down the slope, Scout bounding alongside him, equally thrilled by this new game. I found myself drawn into their enthusiasm, setting aside dignity for the pure joy of speed and snow and laughter. Later, building a snowman in our front yard, Jamie suddenly hugged me, his arms tight around my waist. "This is the best day," he declared. "Thanks for being my dad." "Thank you for being my son," I replied, the words feeling right and true in a way I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. As I penned down these thoughts on a quiet evening, with Jamie completing his homework and Scout snoring softly by the fireplace, I am reminded that life is a tapestry of intertwined destinies, each thread vital in its own right. My journey from an unyielding billionaire to a compassionate guardian is far from over, but it is a journey filled with purpose and meaning. The business empire I built hasn't crumbled in my absence from New York. If anything, it has become more stable, more ethically grounded, as I've insisted on practices that reflect the values I've rediscovered. My wealth now serves a purpose beyond accumulation, funding educational initiatives in Oak Ridge, supporting the Children's Home, establishing a foundation in Mike's name to help other orphaned children. Tomorrow, Jamie has a science fair project to present. Scout has a veterinary checkup, a routine visit, though Jamie insists on bringing the special treats he made himself. I have a video conference with international investors, followed by a meeting with Mayor Thompson about revitalizing Oak Ridge's historic downtown area. It's a full life, balanced in ways my previous existence never was. I've learned that the true measure of success is not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the legacy of kindness and the lasting impact we leave on the hearts of those we touch. Mike knew this all along. It just took me a little longer to understand. As I watch the snow continue to fall outside my window, I'm grateful for second chances, for unexpected journeys, and for the wisdom of a friend who knew me better than I knew myself. Most of all, I'm grateful for Jamie and Scout, who taught me that family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you build, one day, one choice, one moment of love at a time.